My name is Marin. I'm 28, and I've spent most of my adult life working 2 jobs to keep my head above water, sometimes literally, while also chipping in on my parents' mortgage. It's just what I do. I'm the reliable one, or I was the reliable one until last Tuesday. I was at the bank, the one I've used since I opened my first savings account at 12. Just a routine visit to update my contact details, nothing exciting. Sophie Johnson, a newish banker with a kind smile, was helping me. She was going through my accounts, ticking boxes, when she paused. "And we'll just confirm the details for your older trust account, too," she said, her finger hovering over something on her screen. "The one from your grandfather, Harold Sr.?" My heart stopped. Trust account? Grandfather? My grandfather, my dad's father, passed away when I was 12. He was a good man, but not exactly wealthy. I'd never heard a word about a trust account. I don't have a trust account," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. Sophie's smile faltered. She typed something, frowned, then looked back at me, her expression shifting to concern. "It shows here it was opened in your name when you were 22, with $250,000, but it was fully dispersed 6 years ago, on a notarized request from your parents." 22? 6 years ago. That was when I was struggling through my last year of college, working part-time, barely affording ramen. $250,000? Gone. My parents. I left the bank in a daze, the numbers echoing in my head. $250,000. My inheritance. Drained. I called my parents from the car, my hands shaking. Harold answered, then Milena got on the line. They both feigned ignorance, stumbling over their words, claiming they had no idea what I was talking about. It was a terrible performance. That night, I drove to their house. They were out, probably at some bridge game. I went straight to the attic, a place I hadn't been since I was a kid. Dust motes danced in the single beam of light from the small window. Buried under old photo albums and forgotten holiday decorations, I found it. A stack of bank statements, official-looking documents, and there it was, my signature. A clumsy, almost childish scrawl, but clearly not mine. A forgery. My eyes scanned the pages, my breath catching in my throat. One line item, dated 6 years ago, screamed at me. A transfer for over $50,000 to Aiden's account. It was right there, smack in the middle of the dates for his messy divorce settlement. The next morning, I drove straight to Aiden's apartment. He was still in his pajamas, nursing a coffee. My brother, Aiden, always seemed to glide through life, even after his divorce. He looked surprised to see me, but the surprise quickly turned to annoyance when I slammed the bank statements on his coffee table. "What is this, Marin?" he asked, picking up a page, his eyes scanning it quickly. Too quickly. "It's my inheritance, Aiden. Or what was my inheritance. $250,000, and a good chunk of it landed in your account 6 years ago, right when you were finalizing your divorce," I said, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. He scoffed, leaning back. "Oh, that? That was family money, for family emergencies. Mom and Dad handled it. It wasn't really yours. You were still in college, barely knew how to manage a checking account." He waved a dismissive hand. Just then my phone rang. It was Mom. I ignored it. Aiden's phone buzzed too. He glanced at it, then back at me. "Look, don't make a big deal out of this. It's done. It was years ago." Later that day, the guilt-tripping started in earnest. My parents called separately, then together. Milena, my mother, was tearful, saying, "We just wanted to help Aiden. He was in such a bad place. You were never ready for that kind of money, sweetheart." Harold, my father, was more pragmatic, but no less condescending. "We made a judgment call, Marin. For the family. We always put family first. Family first." That phrase rang hollow. I thought back to all the times Aiden had messed up, the failed business ventures, the mountain of credit card debt, the car accidents, and how Mom and Dad always swooped in to save him. Meanwhile, I worked 2 jobs, took out student loans, and paid my own way, never asking for a dime. I was the reliable daughter, the one who never needed bailing out, and apparently that meant I was disposable. I called Serenity, my best friend. She's always been my rock, practical and sharp. I laid it all out for her over takeout. She listened, her expression hardening with every detail. "This isn't right, Marin. This is theft and forgery." We spent the next few days digging. Serenity, with her knack for research, helped me navigate public records. We started tracing the money's flow, looking for shell business ventures linked to Aiden. It was tedious, but we found a few, registered under obscure names, but with clear ties back to him. Then Serenity found it. A series of large withdrawals from one of the shell accounts dated precisely to the deadlines for Aiden's divorce settlement. It wasn't just a lump sum. It was a methodical draining, timed perfectly to his legal obligations. Serenity's findings solidified my resolve. This wasn't just a family misunderstanding. It was a calculated scheme. I knew I needed professional help, someone who could untangle the financial web my parents and Aiden had woven. Serenity recommended Cassandra McCoy, a forensic accountant she'd heard good things about. Cassandra, at 36, was sharp, methodical, and had a no-nonsense demeanor that I instantly trusted. I met Cassandra in her office a week later. I brought all the documents I'd found in the attic, along with Serenity's research. Cassandra listened patiently, her eyes scanning the papers as I spoke. When I finished, she simply nodded. "This looks like a clear case of fraud and potentially forgery. We'll need to subpoena bank records, but what you have here is a strong starting point." Over the next few weeks, Cassandra worked fast. She uncovered further transfers, not just to Aiden's personal account, but to several other entities he controlled. Each discovery fueled my anger, hardening into a cold, determined resolve. My phone buzzed constantly with calls from my parents, but I let them all go to voicemail. I couldn't talk to them, not yet. Every conversation would just be more manipulation, more guilt-tripping. I needed to focus on building an airtight case. Then, out of the blue, I got a message on social media. It was from Reagan Franklin, Aiden's ex-wife. Reagan, who my parents had painted as the villain in their divorce, the one who bled Aiden dry. I hesitated, but curiosity and a gut feeling made me reply. We met for coffee. Reagan, 34, looked tired but composed. She started by saying, "I heard through the grapevine something was going on with your family. Aiden's been a mess." She then launched into a detailed account of Aiden's financial games during their marriage, the hidden assets, the elaborate schemes to avoid alimony, the way he'd always relied on his parents to cover his tracks. "They enabled him constantly," she said, her voice bitter. "They'd always find a way to make his problems disappear." She then pulled out a thick envelope. "I kept everything from the divorce. I knew one day something like this would come out. Aiden was always so careless." Inside were bank statements, emails, and legal documents. As I looked through them, my heart pounded. They matched my findings exactly. There were transfers from accounts I hadn't even known about, all linked to the same time frame. I took the documents straight to Cassandra. She meticulously went through them, cross-referencing with the bank records she'd already obtained. A few days later, she called me. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge to it. "Marin, I found something critical. A forged signature on a loan document tied to one of Aiden's shell companies. It's not just your signature that was forged. This one, if proven, legally incriminates both your parents. It's enough for a criminal case." The news from Cassandra about the second forged signature solidified my path forward. There was no turning back now. My parents, sensing my hostility from my unanswered calls and the sudden silence, started escalating their own attempts to reach me. Their messages shifted from tearful pleas to thinly veiled threats, begging for a private meeting to talk this through, just family. But I was done talking. I had spent weeks gathering evidence, and the anger had calcified into a cold, hard resolve. I hired Freddie Hayes, the attorney Cassandra recommended. He was 41, direct and unflinching, and didn't mince words. "This isn't going to be pretty, Marin," he'd told me in our first meeting, "but you have a strong case." A few days later, Freddie served my parents with a formal demand for full financial disclosure. It was a legal document, not a friendly phone call. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Harold showed up at my apartment that evening unannounced. His face was red, his jaw clenched. He looked furious, but there was a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "What the hell is this, Marin? Are you really going to do this to your own family?" He paced my small living room, his voice rising. "This is insane. We're your parents. We did what we thought was best." I stood my ground, arms crossed. "What you thought was best? You stole from me, Dad. You forged my signature. You funneled my inheritance to Aiden while I was working 2 jobs to pay my own way. You lied to me for 6 years. He stopped pacing, staring at me. "It was a loan. We were going to pay it back. Aiden was in trouble." "A loan you never told me about, never asked for my permission for, and never bothered to repay," I shot back. He threw his hands up in exasperation. "This is going to destroy us, Marin. You'll regret this." He stormed out, slamming the door behind him. Minutes later, Milena called, her voice a raw sob. "Marin, please, don't do this. Families don't survive lawyers. You're tearing us apart. Don't you love us?" Her words were a familiar manipulation, designed to make me feel guilty, to make me back down. A wave of isolation washed over me. The weight of what I was doing, of taking legal action against my own parents, was immense. The guilt was a dull ache in my chest. But then I thought of the forged signatures, of Aiden's dismissive attitude, of all the years I'd been overlooked. I called Serenity. "It's hard, isn't it?" she said, her voice soft but firm. "But you have every right to do this, Marin. They stole from you. They betrayed you. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice. And you deserve it." Her words were a lifeline. The next morning, a process server showed up at my door. I was being served with a counterclaim from my parents. The charge, intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to turn the tables, and it only hardened my resolve further. The counterclaim was a low blow, but it didn't deter me. If anything, it fueled my determination. Freddie, my lawyer, just shook his head when he saw it. "Standard tactic," he'd said, "trying to make you back off. Don't." A few weeks later, we were all in a mediation room. Me, Freddie, my parents, and their lawyer, and Aiden, looking incredibly uncomfortable with his own attorney. The air was thick with unspoken resentments. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about years of buried favoritism, of being the overlooked daughter. The mediator, a calm, older woman, tried to set a neutral tone, but it was useless. The moment she asked about the trust fund, the dam broke. "Marin, you have to understand," Milena started, her voice trembling. "Aiden was in such a desperate situation with Reagan. He was going to lose everything. We just wanted to help him. I forged your signature because I thought it was the only way to keep him from losing everything. I did it out of love." She looked at me, her eyes pleading, but I saw the manipulation, the same old song and dance, love for Aiden, at my expense. Harold surprisingly spoke up next. He looked tired, defeated. "Aiden, he's always been weaker, Marin. He needs more help. You're so capable, so independent. We thought you wouldn't need it as much." His words were a punch to the gut. It wasn't just that they stole from me. It was that they genuinely believed I was less deserving, less in need, because I was the responsible one. Aiden, who had been silent until then, suddenly exploded. "This is ridiculous. It was family money. You're ruining everything, Marin. Our family is falling apart because of you." He stood up, knocking his chair back. "I'm not apologizing for anything. You're the one who's tearing us apart." He stormed out of the room, his lawyer scrambling to follow him. The mediator sighed, looking at my parents, then at me. It seems we've reached an impasse. I felt a strange mix of vindication and sorrow. The truth was out. The rot was exposed. It was ugly, but it was real. Later that day, my phone rang. It was Freddie. His voice was grim. "Marin, I just got off the phone with the district attorney's office. They've reviewed Cassandra's findings, especially that second forged signature. Criminal fraud charges are officially filed against your parents. The DA is very interested." Freddie's call about the criminal charges landed like a bombshell. It wasn't just a civil suit anymore. This was serious. The next few weeks were a blur of depositions and subpoenas. My parents, now facing not just financial ruin but potential jail time, were frantic. Freddie prepped me for public court testimony, walking me through every possible question, every potential attack on my character. It was grueling, but I was ready. The news spread through our small community like wildfire. Family, friends, neighbors, even distant relatives started taking sides. Some whispered about how heartless I was, suing my own parents. Others, though fewer, quietly reached out to offer support, saying they'd always suspected something was off with Aiden and my parents' endless enabling. The Hunts, once a picture of suburban normalcy, became the subject of hushed gossip, isolated by the very scandal they'd tried to bury. Meanwhile, Cassandra was still meticulously sifting through every document, every email. She was like a bloodhound, sniffing out every last trace of their deception. One afternoon, she called me, her voice tinged with a quiet triumph. "Marin, I found it. The smoking gun. It was an email chain, dated 6 years ago, between Harold and a specific bank officer. The messages explicitly authorized the illegal transfers from my trust account, detailing how to bypass standard protocols and obscure the paper trail. It was cold, calculated, and undeniable proof that Harold was not just complicit, but the orchestrator. It proved everything. The trial date loomed, a massive, unmovable object on the horizon. I felt a strange mix of dread and anticipation. This was it, the culmination of years of being overlooked, of being the reliable daughter who was taken for granted. Then, on the eve of the trial, just as I was trying to get some sleep, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Milena standing there, looking utterly broken. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hair disheveled. She looked years older than 58. "Marin," she whispered, her voice hoarse, "please, don't do this. I can't go to jail. Harold, he's falling apart. Please, if you drop the criminal charges, I'll confess everything. I'll tell them I forged the signatures. I'll take full responsibility. Just don't send us to prison." She was begging, truly begging, for mercy. It was a raw, desperate plea, stripped of all her usual manipulation. For a moment, I saw not the mother who betrayed me, but a terrified woman facing the consequences of her choices. The silence stretched, heavy with years of unspoken pain. Milena's plea hung in the air, a desperate echo of the woman who had always protected Aiden, no matter the cost. But I had come too far. Her confession, if genuine, would be powerful, but it wouldn't erase the years of lies or the financial damage. I looked at her, my expression unreadable. "I'll tell my lawyer what you said, Mom," was all I offered, and then I closed the door. The next morning, the courtroom was packed. Every seat was taken, a mix of curious onlookers, family, friends, and reporters. Freddie was a rock beside me, his presence calming. My parents sat at the defense table looking small and defeated. Aiden was conspicuously absent. Milena was the first to testify. She looked terrified, but she kept her word. Under Freddie's direct questioning, she systematically detailed the deception, how she and Harold had accessed my grandfather's trust, how she had forged my signature on the withdrawal forms, and how the money had been funneled to Aiden to cover his divorce settlement and his failing business ventures. Her voice was barely a whisper as she admitted to the years of lies, her eyes occasionally darting to me, then quickly away. Harold followed. He was harried, bitter, and tried to downplay the damage, claiming it was a temporary loan and that they'd always intended to repay it. But Freddie, armed with Cassandra's meticulous evidence, including the damning email chain, systematically dismantled his defense. Harold tried to deflect, to blame Aiden, to blame the circumstances, but the facts were undeniable. The forged documents, the bank transfers, the explicit instructions in his emails, it all pointed directly to his orchestration. The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, listened intently, occasionally interjecting with sharp questions. The evidence mounted piece by piece, painting a devastating picture of betrayal. Then came the moment of truth. The judge asked about Aiden's absence. Harold, looking utterly broken, finally cracked. "He's a coward," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "He wouldn't show up. He left us to face this alone." In open court, my father disowned his golden child. The silence in the room was deafening. The judge's ruling was decisive. She found overwhelmingly in my favor, awarding me nearly the full amount of the inheritance, plus significant damages and legal fees. She also stated that criminal sanctions against my parents would be scheduled, pending restitution. It was a complete victory. As the gavel fell, a collective sigh went through the courtroom. My parents slumped in their seats, Milena openly weeping, Harold staring blankly ahead. Freddie put a hand on my shoulder. "It's over, Marin." In the hallway, as Harold and Milena broke down in tears, surrounded by their lawyer, I saw him. Aiden. He was slipping away through a side exit, his head down, trying to avoid eye contact. His reputation was in tatters, his support system shattered. He was alone. The days after the trial felt strangely hollow. I had won. The judge had ruled decisively, and the criminal charges against my parents were moving forward, contingent on them making restitution. Aiden was a ghost, having vanished after the trial, his reputation in tatters, his endless enabling finally hitting a wall. My parents, reeling from the verdict and the looming criminal proceedings, were alienated, their pleas for mercy unanswered. I was financially independent for the first time in my adult life, but the victory felt heavy. The relentless pursuit of justice had taken its toll. I was emotionally spent, a raw nerve. The constant fighting, the confrontations, the public spectacle, it had drained me more than any double shift ever could. One evening, a few weeks after the trial, serenity came over. We sat on my couch, nursing cold beers. The apartment was quiet, a stark contrast to the storm that had raged for months. "So," she said, clinking her bottle against mine, "you got what you wanted, justice, validation." I nodded, taking a long sip. "Yeah, I did." I looked around my small apartment, the same one I'd struggled to pay rent for. Now it felt different, not because of what I had, but because of what I'd lost. It cost a lot, though. "Everything has a cost, Marin," Serenity replied, her gaze steady. "But you stood up for yourself. You forced them to face consequences. That's huge." She was right. For years, I'd been the one to sacrifice, to be responsible, while Aiden got a free pass. Now, the roles were reversed. They were facing the music, and I was finally in control of my own future. Letters started arriving from my parents. Harold's were short, formal, apologizing for the misjudgment and promising to comply with the court's orders. Milena's were long, tear-stained epistles filled with apologies, regrets, and desperate hopes for reconciliation. She wrote about how much she missed me, how she wished things could go back to normal. I read them all, every word, but I never replied. There was nothing left to say. The wound was too deep, the trust shattered beyond repair. Then one morning, a new account statement arrived in the mail. I opened it with a strange mix of trepidation and anticipation. There it was, clear as day. The restored funds, plus the damages and legal fees, all deposited into an account under my name. My name, my signature, my future. It was real. I looked up from the statement, my eyes falling on an old framed photo on my desk. It was from years ago, before everything. Me, Aiden, Mom, and Dad, all smiling, standing in front of our old house. We looked like a happy